Look at you crying already. 35 miles is nothing. Maybe the rain will rinse. The attitude off that was my father's voice, not sharp, not angry, but light almost. Playful, like he was teasing a child. Except this wasn't teasing, it was punishment. It was abandonment. I stood on the side of a county road with no shoulder as the sky ripped itself open. The first raindrop slid down the bridge of my nose, cold and sharp. Then another and another until the entire sky poured down in sheets that felt like needles. The gravel beneath my sneakers turned into a slurry, sucking me down as if even the earth wanted me gone. Headlights ghosted past in the distance, fast, indifferent. No one slowed. No one noticed my breath fogged against the storm. My hands trembled so badly. I pressed them into my sides to keep from shaking. My phone was in my pocket, useless black. Screen, no battery, he made sure of that. No calls, no wallet, nothing, just the lesson, and his lessons always sounded the same. Humiliation, fear, silence, strength, measured only by how well I swallowed it. Strong women don't whine, he used to say, and whining in his dictionary meant any sound that resembled a boundary. I didn't run after him. I didn't wave my arms or beg for him to stop. I didn't scream as the tail lights shrank and vanished, two red dots fading until they blinked out like a door closing on a room. I had lived in my whole life. My name is Marin Vale, and I learned to keep my face still a long time ago, still enough that people believed I was fine, even when inside my ribs rattled like a birdcage caught in a hurricane. I grew up in a house where love was braided into control, where apologies arrived with invoices, where rules shifted like goalposts and winning was impossible. So when he said I needed a lesson, I already knew what the curriculum would be. Humiliation, fear, silence, and the demand that I endure it without letting him see me break. The rain needled my scalp. The taste of metal settled on my tongue, the static of the storm buzzing in my teeth. I stepped off the road and stood beneath a billboard for a storage company. Its cartooned smiling key streaked with running ink mascara, tears dripping from painted dimples. Frogs croaked in the ditch like some bad joke. Wind combed the field and lifted the wet hair from my neck. My father's car was gone, and the quiet after. Cruelty never felt like quiet. It hissed, it pressed in, it filled my ears with the echo of everything he'd ever said about strength and weakness. I thought of the way he laughed whenever I told him no, as if my mouth had mispronounced a simpler word. I thought of him at home already, warm, self-satisfied, telling my mother I'd come back. Softer, smaller, grateful, but then headlights curved onto the shoulder a black truck, moving slow and deliberate, tires whispering over the wet grit. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out into the raincoat, unbothered posture. Steady. His voice cut through the storm, calm, low. "Miss Vale, ready. Let's go." It was Elias, my bodyguard, the one man who seemed to understand silence better than words. I climbed in without wiping my face. Heat rolled over me from the truck's vents. Steady like a hand pressed against my back in the side mirror, the storm slashed. White tally marks across the blacktop. My father believed in lessons, but this time he had enrolled in mine. The final course, no retakes, graded on mercy. I no longer owed thunder, followed low and patient like a gavel. Coming down, the door latched shut, and the hum of the heater wrapped my bones like a blanket pulled from a mother's arms. I never had. Elias kept his eyes forward, both hands steady on the wheel, his jaw cut, stone unreadable, but his silence was deliberate. He knew not every wound wanted words. Sometimes it just wanted space to breathe. Water traced silver veins down the windshield, blurring the world into smears of glass and storm. My heart still pounded in the rhythm of abandonment, fast, uneven, betrayed. I pressed my palm over the heater vent, chasing warmth, into a shiver that had settled too deep. "Did he really leave you here?" Elias asked, finally, his voice low, like he already knew the answer but wanted me to have the dignity of saying it aloud. I nodded, once my throat too raw from holding. Back he didn't push. He just let the miles begin to fall away, headlights brushing over. Drenched fields, ditches swallowing pieces of the night. Every turn of the tires felt like we were crossing not just distance, but years of silence, years of control, years of me convincing myself cruelty was simply parenting sharpened by discipline. When we reached a crossroads, Elias slowed the wipers, thumping steady across the glass, his Voice slipped through the hum. "Do you want to go home?" The word. Home hit like a split down the middle. It was the house. I knew like the lines of my palm, but it was never a place that knew me back. I turned my face toward the window. The reflection of the storm stared back, fierce and cold. No, I whispered the first no. That didn't feel like disobedience, but survival. His eyes flicked toward me, and in them there was no pity, only respect. The recognition of a fighter, and he pressed the accelerator. The tires hummed louder, the truck stretching. The space between me and the place I had been raised but never belonged somewhere. Behind us, I knew my father would already be telling his story, spinning it into discipline, bragging about tough love, mocking the image of me in the rain. He'd call it education. He wouldn't know the truth because I wasn't crying anymore. He thought he drove away and left me stranded, but it was me who had left him behind 35 miles and a lifetime away. The storm outside began to thin, but the storm inside me sharpened. Elias didn't break the silence until the miles unrolled into the shape of headlights on empty fields, then his voice low again. "What do you want to do, Marine?" The question pierced. Deeper than it should have. For years, my answers had always been trained into me what my father wanted, who he wanted me to be, how small he wanted me to shrink, to be asked. "What do you want?" Felt so foreign. It almost hurt. I swallowed hard, my chest burning. I want him to feel what I felt. Tonight I said small but sharp, abandoned, small silence, empty. Elias didn't flinch, didn't tell me revenge was wrong. He just drove steadier, his grip tightening on the wheel, like a man who understood Elias had lived wars. His silence told me he knew cruelty when he saw it, and he knew justice wasn't always neat. We passed. A road sign, city limits 12 miles. The glow of it lingered inside me like a promise. I imagined my father at home, his glass in hand, his voice carrying through the walls about how strong men raise daughters by breaking them, and I let the thought sit heavy. Before whispering, "He won't know, but I'm not broken anymore." The city lights grew, nearer, necklaces of fire against the horizon, neon bleeding through rain and fog. Elias steered us into its glow, calm, as if walking into a story he already knew the ending to. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cold window for the first time in years. I wasn't being measured, I was just me, and that was unbearable and freeing at once. We pulled into a diner on the edge of town, its red sign buzzing, half the letters burned. Out inside, the air was warm, ordinary, smelling of coffee and fried onions. Elias slid into the booth across from me, posture precise, hands folded. "Food first," he said, "plans second." The waitress poured steaming mugs, and I wrapped my fingers around mine, letting the heat unknot the cold my father had planted. I stared into the dark liquid and whispered, "He'll twist it by morning. He'll tell everyone I stormed off, that I disrespected him." Elias's eyes met mine. Steady, doesn't matter what he says. What matters is what you do next. His words landed heavy like anchors. I thought of every dinner where his version of reality drowned mine out, every story retold until I couldn't even recognize myself. But this time, I held the truth, and silence no longer scared me. Out, I said, "Not just of the house of his shadow." Elias gave a soldier this nod, sharp and sure. "Then we make sure he never stands tall enough to cast it again." Outside, the rain had softened to mist. A faint star flickered through the thinning clouds. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how far he had left me. I was thinking about how far I could go without him, and that distance felt like the sharpest blade of all. The truck still smelled faintly of rain when we climbed back in, coffee warming my stomach. Elias steady as stone behind the wheel. The city lights dissolved into darkness again, roads stretching open and endless. I thought about the word out, the way it slipped from my mouth back at the diner like a secret I had buried under years of obedience. Out meant escape, but it also meant choice. And choice was heavier than chains because now I could no longer pretend I didn't have power. Elias's silence worked like a mirror, reflecting my own thoughts back at me. I could almost hear my father's voice layering in accusations, ungrateful, dramatic, soft. Spoiled, he had so many names for me, none of them my own. I pressed my fingernails into my palms, small crescents sharp enough to sting, reminding me that I was still here, still. Deciding. The night widened, fields to either side, wet grass shining like knives beneath the headlights. My breath fogged the glass again, but this time it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like proof. Elias finally spoke, his voice low as gravel, steady as the road revenge. Is a path you don't turn back from. His words weren't a warning, more like a map. I turned my face toward him, my voice almost steady. I don't want to turn back. His jaw shifted once, a faint muscle twitch. Then his nod came, slow, deliberate. Then we do this, right? He said, not loud, but heavy like a pact. My pulse thudded with a rhythm that didn't belong to fear anymore. It belonged to something sharper, hunger, resolve, maybe even. Freedom headlights sliced through the wet dark, illuminating road signs I had never paid attention to before, towns, names, possibilities, each one whispering. Distance from him, from the version of me he thought he built. I remembered the rain on my scalp, the sting of being left behind, and instead of trembling, I let it steal me. In the quiet hum of the truck, I realized 35 miles wasn't punishment. It was ignition, and the fire was already catching inside my ribs. Elias's hands tightened once on the wheel, and I knew without him saying it that he would drive as far as I was willing to go. The road bent toward a sleeping town, the kind with one gas station, one bar, and too many secrets. Elias slowed only enough to roll through stoplights that blinked, yellow into the wet night. My father always said small towns are cages, but looking at their dim windows and empty porches, I realized cages only work if you don't know the lock is already open. Freedom doesn't look like shining towers. Sometimes it looks like a diner booth or a wet road under borrowed headlights. My phone, still dead in my pocket, sat heavy like a reminder he wanted me, unreachable, silent, erased. I curled my fingers around it anyway, feeling the weight of his intent, and for the first time it didn't feel like control. It felt like evidence, the kind that burns hotter than gasoline. Elias glanced once at me, his profile carved sharp by the dashboard glow. He said, "You'll need allies. Not pity, not friends, allies." His words wrapped around me like armor. I thought of my mother who stayed, who believed survival meant silence. I thought of my cousins who laughed when I flinched at his temper, and I knew allies wouldn't. It come from blood sometimes, blood only stains. He turned the truck down an older road, gravel spitting beneath the tires, woods crowding close, and black. He killed the headlights and let us coast in near dark. The only glow was the soft red of the dash, his voice steady as always. Every tyrant thinks they can't be touched until them wrong. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out barely above a whisper. He underestimated me. Elias let the silence stretch long enough that the truth could settle between us. Then he answered, "Not anymore." The truck rolled to a stop beneath the shrouded outline of trees. The storm had passed, leaving only the smell of wet earth and something electric in the air. He cut the engine. The world went still. My heart beat loud enough I thought it might rattle the mirrors. Elias finally turned to me, his eyes unreadable, his voice carrying weight like a verdict. "You're not just leaving him, Marin, you're dismantling him piece by piece. If you want that, I'll stand with you. But once you start, there's no pause, no forgiveness, no return." I breathed in wet air. Lungs burning out didn't mean vanishing. It meant erasing his shadow brick by brick, until he had nowhere left to stand. My lips parted, and the word came certain. Yes. The word yes still trembled in the air like a blade freshly drawn. Elias didn't nod right away. He studied me the way a soldier studies terrain, gauging not the will but the endurance. His silence pressed like weight, but it wasn't the heavy silence of my father. It was one that gave me space to breathe finally. He said, "Then we begin, not tomorrow, not someday." Now my pulse jumped sharp against my ribs, my voice low. How he leaned forward, forearms against the wheel, eyes hard reflecting the faint red of the dash. He doesn't just control you, he controls the story, people. Believe it because he says it first, so you'll take the story from him. I felt a shiver climb my spine, not fear, something sharper, colder, like steel settling into place. He explained slow, each word. Certain first we gather what he hides, every secret. Every deal, every cruelty turned into record. He thinks discipline leaves no paper trail, but arrogance always does. I thought of the ledger in his study drawer, the one he guarded. More than his liquor cabinet, the way he kept old receipts like trophies, not evidence. My whisper cracked. "I know where he keeps them." Elias's mouth curved not into a smile, but into the faintest recognition. "Good, then you already hold the key, the truck engine." Off the night pressed around us, thick with damp earth and unseen branches creaking. In the wind, Elias reached under the seat, pulling out a small black case metal latches. Snapping open inside tools, neat, precise, not weapons, but instruments, cameras, recorders. Small enough to disappear in a pocket, my chest tightened, the realization sharp this. Wasn't just a ride, this was preparation he had been waiting for. My yes waiting for. Me to choose. He slid the case between us, his voice steady but low. We build proof then. We build fire without proof. Revenge is noise with it, revenge is justice. My breath fogged. The glass again, but it wasn't weakness this time. It was momentum. It was the shape of something larger than myself finally taking form. I thought of my father's voice bragging in living rooms. Slamming doors, telling me 30. 5 miles is nothing, maybe the rain will rinse the attitude off. And I knew what 30. 5 miles really was not punishment ignition, a distance he thought would shrink me, but instead stretched into the beginning of his end. I curled my fingers around the cold metal of the recorder, feeling its weight as if it were more dangerous than any blade. Elias watched me unblinking. When you go back different. You go back armed. Do you understand? My nod came slow but steady. Yes, I said again. This time it didn't tremble. The rain that once felt like punishment had turned into a quiet memory. And as Marin closed her eyes in her own apartment, the hum of silence wrapped around her like armor. Her father still had his house, his name, his stories, but none of it mattered anymore. He had lost the one thing he could never control, her. And in that loss, Marin finally won.